Joining me. This is a session we're going to be doing on the Azure Bot Framework, covering how to actually build a chatbot. And in this chatbot, we're actually going to build a ISS tracker. So it's going to track the current location of the ISS, and we're going to be able to get some fun facts on the ISS and kind of handle some common questions you might have for the International Space Station. So let's just dive right in. So when building a chatbot, you're first going to want to kind of expect what you're using your chatbot for and why it's so important to have one. Oh, sorry, I'm on two screens here. So a really fundamental use of chatbots is reducing strain on call centers and answering easily answerable questions. So frequently asked questions that you'd find on your website, usually things like what time to open, when what's your location, that you wouldn't necessarily want a human answering, but you could have a conversational sort of environment. Somebody's asking that question and you can respond to them and it wouldn't be any the wiser they're speaking to a chatbot. Chatbots are also very fast to respond and accurate. So if it's a well-trained chatbot, typically get really accurate answers, more so than a human being, because there's human error, and chatbots don't really run into that unless they aren't programmed correctly, and they're always online, and that's a huge benefit because your call center is never office, and you can always be answering customer questions any time of day. A lot of people implement their chatbot as kind of a hybrid approach, where the chatbot is actually the gatekeeper for the live assistants. So if you use the chatbot as a gatekeeper, it's going to be able to capture all those frequently asked questions. It's going to be able to handle kind of some of the simpler tasks. But if you really do need to escalate this to a manager or to somebody live, it will do that as well, and it will tie in somebody to have the context of the previous conversation, and then that way they can answer the user's request accurately. Chatbots are also becoming extremely popular. 40% of Americans use a voice search tool daily, that whether that's Siri or Google Assistant or Alexa. I catch myself talking to my Alexa almost every day just to set a timer for cooking things. But they're really becoming popular and really widely disseminated. So, and a lot of people tend to find themselves running into chatbots, and searches are actually starting to be more geared towards voice to text rather than just text search. So voice assistants are becoming more and more popular because of that. And around 70% of people who do actually have one of these assistants and are engaged with it use it almost daily. So this is kind of just a graph of kind of a user representation of what they would expect from a chatbot, things that users expect to see when they're speaking to a bot. And this just kind of gives you an idea of what you should be aiming for in your conversations. 24/7 support is obviously the #1 thing users love to see. And then things like friendliness and all that can be added in, but they're not as important. So it's good to have an experience for your user, but it's not as important as accurately replying and getting a quick reply. So when we're talking about chatbots, we're going to be running into natural language processing a lot. And natural language processing is how computers analyze text and conversations to gather information out of that. So for example, when you're analyzing a statement, a lot of times when you hear it as a person, you understand the intent and the sentiment of the statement. But the computer needs to analyze that for the intent, the sentiment, and the entities of the statement. The intent would be kind of the verb in the sentence. So I want to find something, and that intent might be find location, find this, where the entity would be the object in the sentence that you're acting upon. So I want to find the ISS. The ISS would be the entity in that statement. And then the sentiment would be kind of a positive or negative response. So I don't like this would be a negative sentiment, or I love this might be a positive sentiment. But this is how the computer can gather that information from the sentence and create accurate, meaningful responses. And this also allows the users to talk to the bot as if they were talking to a person, which just makes the whole flow a lot easier for everybody, and it makes it a smooth transition into actually talking to a live assistant if you do need to escalate to that. So as we jump into this, the Luis.ai is going to be our natural language processing unit. It's going to gather sentiments, intents, and entities from the sentences that we use. So Luis.ai is Azure's NLP suite, essentially. And it's a very easy to use suite. There's a UI that you can go in and just drag and drop and put in different intents and sentiments. And we'll talk about that in just a moment here. But it's very interesting, and you can pull all sorts of composite entities. So you can grab multiple entities from a sentence. You can grab multiple intents, and you can also gather this. You can also add spell check and things like that to make it so your user doesn't have to be perfect every time they say something. So this is essentially the brain, and as we discussed, the entity and the intent here. So I'm just going to pull up my Luis environment and show you guys what that looks like. So I'm here at Luis.ai on the Azure site, and this is my app that I've built out for us. Is the ISS tracker Luis. And this is a version 1, so you can actually have multiple versions and always revert back if you decide to make any changes that you don't want to keep. But here we've built out a get location intent. And this intent, we wanted to identify an entity, and we also wanted to identify the intent with that entity. So when we say, where's the International Space Station, our entity picked up is the location entity, and it gathers the International Space Station as that entity. So if we added some, and we can see here there's a confidence score set for each of these. This score actually represents how confident the Luis system is that this is the correct intent for the statement. And the more utterances you add, or the more examples you add, the more accurate your Luis is going to be. So where's the ISS is not one that I've seen there at the moment. If we go ahead and add that, we can then train our bot, and we can see here it has a 0.927 score, so it's already pretty accurate and it's confident, and it's also picked up on this entity here. But just to improve our bot a little bit, we'll go ahead and train the untrained changes. This is going to actually save the changes so that they're put into our bot going forward, and then when we're finished training, we'll go ahead and publish the bot to a live endpoint so that we can actually use it within our chatbot. Just wait for that to publish. And if you go in, you can actually test your Luis environment by itself and say something like complete gibberish. And we'll see here that it has a get location intent score of 0.5. So this is only pulling up this get location intent score of 0.549 because we only have this one intent built in. But typically you don't want to use any intents that are lower than 0.8 intent score. So we'll put a filter into our code to make sure that we have a high intent score. But if we say something like the ISS, the get location intent score is a 0.985. And you can say things like that. You can be incorrect in your grammar, and it will still pick up everything that you need to know for the get location, and it will also pick up entities as well if they are listed in here. I actually set that entity because it was a suggestion and I didn't set it, but I'll just train that change there, and we'll be good to go. This is a brain operation. We have multiple intents in here. You can really go wherever they need to go, and you can make it a really powerful bot. We can also review endpoint utterance here. So anything that isn't necessarily matched up to a intent perfectly, it's going to suggest in here that we can actually just go ahead and check this. How large is the ISS? So these aren't questions that we want to have as the get location, so we'll just delete these. So we don't want to set their intent to get location. We want to send it to something else. This one is where the ISS will actually keep that get location intent. How big is the ISS? We don't want that to be caught in the get location intent, and so on. So you can go through there and audit your bots so that you can pick up on these utterances that people have put into it that didn't necessarily get answered correctly. And that'll ultimately make your predictions more accurate. Another component of our natural language processing is going to be the QnA Maker. The QnA Maker is the question and answer maker, as you can pull from the name, but it's basically a place to import pre-existing FAQs and have subject matter experts easily manage back-end kind of question and answer responses. So in here, if you do have an existing FAQ on your site, you can actually import the whole thing as just a question and answer, and you can pre-build your bot with a bunch of responses that you would otherwise have to program in. You can also have, it's also got a really nice, easy to use UI where your subject matter experts can go and edit things as they need to be updated. If your store hours change or something changes, you can always edit it in here, and you don't need a developer to come in and make any big changes. And another benefit of the QnA Maker is that it's much cheaper for requests than the Luis. So if you route things through QnA Maker initially and then route to your Luis, that's the ideal scenario, so that your QnA Maker can pick up on any of those kinds and avoid having to hit the Luis endpoint for analysis. And I'll pull up the QnA Maker here as well. So if you go to QnAmaker.ai, and you'll need to create a knowledge base. Every once in a while, it won't display your knowledge base for one reason or another. So, here we go. Apologies, taking a moment to load here. Just pull it up in that tab. It's a little faster in the second one for some reason. Does not want to play. There we go. Okay, so here's the ISS tracker QnA. In here, we can see I've already preloaded a question, but I'm going to just go ahead and delete this. And when you're building out your QnA, you're going to have the option to set a kind of tone for your bot, and it's going to preload a bunch of existing questions that Microsoft's already built out for you. You can see here there's 90 QnA pairs. So this is the chit chat friendly bot. So this kind of answers some silly questions in a friendly way. So here you can see the response is swing and a miss, and one of the comments is, this is so interesting, swing and a miss. So that's just kind of a way to add a personality to your bot right off the bat without having to really code anything in. As I mentioned earlier, you can actually import into your bot. So if we go into our bot and we change the settings, okay, it's fine, we'll lose that. We want to add a new file here. So we're going to import our ISS chatbot import.xlsx, and this is just a few questions that are in an Excel spreadsheet with a question answer pairing kind of format that are related to the ISS. So we'll wait for this to import. We need to save and train after we finished importing, and then we can go back to our edit section. And we can see here how long is the ISS, and on the final page, it will have our import. Down, down, down. So I have to look around my computer. And here we can see we have the ISS chatbot import.xlsx answers and questions here. So this is what we imported. You can import as many question answers as you like, and it's a really easy way to kind of pair those off. And just like with the Luis, if you want to make these intents more accurate, you can add multiple utterances to gather the question more accurately. So how large is the International Space Station? You might say that like, how big is the ISS? Or how much does the ISS weigh? Just things like that, multiple ways that your user might answer this question or might ask this question, just so that you can capture it more accurately most of the time. So and once you've filled out some more of these utterances and you're happy with it, you can go ahead and save and train it. And somebody mentioned the font size is a little small. Let me see if I can zoom in. Sorry, changing the size around a little bit so it's a little easier for you guys to see. And we've saved and trained, so now we can go ahead and test our bot. And we'll ask it something like, and we can see here that once we inspect the statement, you can see that the confidence score is 100, and you get the response. And you can see the question itself. So we know that this is going to be accurately answered when our users ask this. Okay. And so to tie all this together, we're going to be using the Azure Bot Framework. And the Azure Bot Framework is Microsoft's framework built on the bot. It's built using Bot Builder, which is the most popular bot building SDK out there. And you can code this in C#, JavaScript, TypeScript, Python, or Java. And there's a bunch of examples out there to get started with. These are really helpful for building your first chatbot and building kind of basis for what you're going to be doing. I have found that the complex dialogue bot is really helpful because it actually offers some conversations that you can actually loop through, and that's what we based our ISS chatbot off of today. And programmability, you may have heard of Power Virtual Agents, which is a great tool, but using the Azure Bot Framework gives you a little bit more power in that you can actually reach out to APIs, you can invoke different actions and tie into pretty much anything on the internet with this bot and have your users' utterances, whatever they say to that bot can be captured, and you can practically turn it into a ticketing system. You can turn it into any sort of UI you'd really like to and have it conversational. So it's a huge advantage. And while Power Virtual Agents has its place, this also does have its place in the Microsoft environment. I really think it's a powerful solution for doing this, for putting together any bot. And I'll just kind of show you guys some of the example Bot Builder community samples. So here you can see this is the Bot Builder community homepage for the GitHub. And this is actually the SDK here. So let's find samples. There we go. So we have multiple samples for .NET Core, JS, Python. We'll just go into the .NET Core samples. And here you can see there's about 50 solutions, 60 solutions, all built around .NET Core, C#, so you can actually see how to build these bots firsthand and not have to kind of just take a swing in the dark. Popular one to start off with is the Echo bot, just because it's a call and response bot that it will just say back what you said to it, and it's very easy to put together. But as I mentioned, I was using the complex dialogue for this bot particularly. But they're all really interesting, and they actually have live assist bots and other things like that. Really cool stuff in here, and you'll notice they have their core adapters here as well: Slack, Facebook, WebEx. These are all things that you can connect your bot to long term, so that you can actually have multiple channels and you're not just on a web chat. And as I was discussing it, there's multiple channels: the Facebook, Twilio, Slack. Those are all core Azure channels. There's also Alexa, Google Assistant, and Twitter, and there's quite a few more community adapter channels that are very well maintained and very useful. I've implemented a few of those, including the Alexa and Google Assistant adapters, and they work extremely well. And those would be community maintained, but if you ever have any issues or any questions, you can always reach out to the people who built that adapter, and they'll be happy to help out. They're very on top of it, and they're usually quick to respond in their GitHub. All right, so let's dive in. And if you're curious, this is the botbuildercommunity.net GitHub page. This is where you're going to find all those samples for the different adapters, the Alexa, Google, Twitter, Ring, Zoom, and InfoBib, which I'm not even sure what that is, but you can adapt to it. Cool. So let's dive in. And just to kind of give you guys an example of what our bot is going to look like when we're all finished here. This is the ISS Facts bot. This is going to be, this is a local environment you can test in. It's called Bot Framework Emulator. It's really useful for building your bots so that you're not running these through production endpoints and paying for requests that you're not actually using. You're still going to be bringing up Luis request and QnA Maker request, but it's not going to be hitting that app service, and you can do all your testing locally before you deploy. So we'll ask our ISS bot, where is the ISS currently? And here we get the lat long of the ISS, and it's in a very remote place because otherwise Google would have told us the location of it. So this is linking into the Google Geocoder API and into the ISS tracker bot. That's a freely available API from NASA. So this, these are actually live coordinates for the ISS at the moment. And we can also go in here and see that our QnA Maker questions were added. So we'll ask, how big is the ISS? Oh, actually, I forgot to publish the QnA Maker now that I mentioned it. So let's just go back in here. And as always, be sure to publish. Otherwise, your changes will not be available for your live bot. Okay. So now we have our bot ready to go. Let me go in and just make sure that our QnA Maker is hooked up. And you don't need to refresh the bot. This is a live endpoint. So here we go. The ISS weighs 925,300 pounds and is 109 by 73 meters wide. And it will ask to assist you with anything else. And this is that looping conversation that I spoke of with complex dialogue bot, pretty much having that built in. So you can always kind of be reprompting your user and gathering information as needed. So let's dive into the actual code here. And is that font size good for you guys? I saw a note that we had a little bit too small. All right, so when you're hooking up your bot, in the complex dialogue bot, you can add something called a bot service. And this is basically going to have all of your information that you need to access the Luis API and access the QnA Maker. So I use this often in my projects just because it's a lot easier than accessing the API with all these hard-coded things throughout the program. It just makes it easy to maintain and kind of update things as they come up. So you'll need your Luis app ID, your Luis app secret, and your endpoint environment that the Luis is on. So whatever resource that Luis is on, the host. And the same thing for your QnA Maker, you'll need the QnA app ID, QnA app secret, and the host. And those can be found in the settings section of the QnA Maker, and they can also be found in the settings section of the Luis. I don't want to pull those up right now just because they have secret keys on them, but all of that can be found in the settings and manage section of your Luis and QnA Maker. When building your bots, it's often wise to have a user profile inside of your bot just to retain information. Bot Framework doesn't allow you to go to specific points within a dialogue to get back to. So this is a great way to kind of retain a history of what your user has said and where they are in the conversation so that you can, let's say you need to ask them multiple questions and you want to gather somebody's email address, their phone number, their name, but then they say, oh, I want to change my email address. you can then route back to the top of this dialog and then have it drop through and hit that email address again, and then just go back through the dialog as normal. So that's a common use for having this kind of user profile here. And you can add any parameter here that you would like to add to it. In our startup.cs here, you're going to see that we added our framework adapter. We have our storage, we have the bot services here. This is the interesting part. So this is where we are actually adding the bot services, the Luis and QnA, to our service so that we can use it throughout the code. And we also have a Google adapter added here. This is the community adapter added. So this is just to hook us up to our Google Assistant. And then this final line here is where the magic happens and you actually declare your dialogue and you start setting up your bot. So here we take the dialogue and welcome bot, which is the bot that we're using, and then we introduce it with the main dialogue. So let me pull up our dialogue and welcome bot and our main dialogue. So the dialogue and welcome bot is going to be where your user is prompted, and you will set a user ID and basically make this a unique user so that they're not running into other people's conversations. And here we go, welcome to the ISS facts, what may ISS do with? And then after that, that's going to drop you through to the main dialogue, which was mentioned on that line. And the main dialogue is going to analyze the prompt response. It's going to check if the QnA Maker response is greater than 0.8 in score. And if it does have a response, then we're going to return the QnA Maker response. Otherwise, we're going to drop through to the next step, which right here you can see .next async. And we're going to go to the final step async. And these steps are declared at the top of our code here in the dialog. When we add a new dialog, we need a new waterfall dialog, and we add these steps to initial step async and final step async. And you can name these whatever you like, you just have to make sure they match the name of your actual step. So once it drops through from the next async to the Luis, it's going to call Luis here under bot services.dispatch, and it's going to recognize the context of the prompt response, and then it's going to get the top intent here. So recognize the result at get top scoring intent is going to pull that top intent, and then we want to get that intent as a string so that we can route through it, and we want to get that intent score so that we're sure that the intent is accurate enough that we want to respond on it. Otherwise, you're going to have responses like we had here, where we said how big is the ISS, and it gave us the get location intent because that was just the intent that was returned because there's only one intent on our Luis at the moment. So right here we set if the intent score is less than 0.8, we're going to just go straight to the conclusion dialog. So that's going to actually just say, can I assist with anything else? I couldn't find anything on that. But if we do have a high enough intent score, it's going to route the intent through our conversation, and it's going to gather the coordinate endpoint of the ISS. It's going to take that coordinate endpoint and it's going to submit it to Google. And we get the geocoder API response, and then we try and find a formatted address for that. And if we don't find a formatted address, in the event that it's in a remote location or it's just floating over Antarctica or something like that, we get the location string of the actual lat long, and then we return that. And then finally, we will drop through to conclusion dialog after the user has been responded to. We'll say, can I assist with anything else? I hard coded this just no, but typically you would want to analyze the sentiment of the user's response here. And if the user says no, it's just a goodbye and we end the dialogue. Otherwise, we go back to the main dialogue and we go through this whole song and dance again. And we would be able to take information that we had stored in our user profile.cs and use that to answer things as we go. So if we had already gathered the user's email address necessarily, we could then use the user's email address without having to ask them again and reprompt them, which is obviously annoying if you ever had to deal with a chatbot and get asked the same question 20 times. It's no fun. So with all that said, we now have our chatbot linked up to our QnA Maker. We have it linked up to our Luis, and we have it hooked up to, we have it ready to go to publish to an actual live web app service. So I'm going to just build this here. And we'll just go ahead and play it, and we'll make sure that we are good to go before we deploy. So go into your bot framework emulator, connect to localhost 3978/API messages, and that's just the default. And we'll wait for our bot to prompt us. Welcome to ISS. What may I assist with? Where is the ISS? And we can see that it's over Montana. That's cool. And in here, you can see that we have the QnA Maker trace, which will actually tell us what the score was on the QnA Maker. If it'll pull up. Lewis trace pulls up. For some reason, it's not pulling up the QnA Maker trace, but here we can see the Lewis trace, and we see here that it has a score of 0.974. It gathered the entity location, and it also gathered the intent. And the get location intent was a 0.98, so it was extremely accurate. The second runner-up intent was none with a 0.01 score. And this is all kind of relevant information. You can it's really useful for debugging your Lewis and kind of making your predictions more accurate. Okay. So once you've tested your bot and you're happy with how it looks and you're happy with how it's responding, you can go ahead and publish. Microsoft has a recommendation for publishing using command line tools. It's unnecessarily complicated. I highly recommend just publishing directly to the app service through Visual Studios. It's a lot easier and there's a lot less, there were a lot of workarounds to work through with that. It was unnecessarily difficult. So you can publish through your Visual Studios. Just make sure you set up the web deploy properly. And you can see here that I already had this published to an ISS tracker bot.azurewebsites.net. And I'll just show you guys what this looks like in here. So we set our connection settings and we set our target framework and deployment mode. And we'll save all this, and we will go ahead and publish to our app service. Just wait for this to finish up. All right, so this pulls up our ISS Tracker Bot site. This is just the host for our app service. And if we go into our Azure, I can pull this up, ISS Tracker Bot. And this is going to be the app service that we just deployed to. So in here, you can go in and test your web chat and make sure your bot is working as it was locally. So we can just do the same question that we had earlier. It's font a little bigger for you guys. And it is working. So another important component of your Azure environment is the channels. Here you can add Teams channel, you can add a Cortana channel, and these are all of the channel. Oh, it looks like they have recently added Alexa. That's interesting. That used to be a community adapter. So that's new. They have just added Alexa as a core, it looks like. So that's awesome. They also have Twilio, so you can do SMS and kind of text messaging, Kik, Skype, all sorts of good adapters to integrate your bot with so that you can pretty much release it anywhere in the world and have anybody be able to use it. The bot service, so when you do spin up a chatbot, you're usually paying for the app service. That's going to be the only cost associated with the bot itself. The Luis and the QnA Maker, on the other hand, all have multiple resources. They're not, so let's see here. So when you spin up the ISS chatbot QnA, you have a cognitive service that gets built, an app service plan, an app service, and an application insights. There's also the search service. The application insights isn't necessarily required. The search service, app service plan, and cognitive services all are. And then we have the actually web app bot and the ISS tracker bot here, and those are the host for our web app service. The Luis, on the other hand, since we are on a free version right now, it's not deployed, but if you did deploy that to a production version, and I believe you have 1,000 endpoint hits before you need to deploy to a production version, that will be here as well, and that would be under a cognitive service plan. Cool. So for now, I just wanted to see, does anybody have any questions I can kind of clear up, or anything that pull this up? Any questions? So one question I just got, what is the lifetime scope of the user profile? So the user profile will last for the duration of a session. The session is considered when the start of the dialogue and the end of the dialogue. So on the Alexa, if you were to have the user's address gathered, it would basically say, it would basically last for the duration of when you started that to when you asked your final request and the Alexa ended the session, was no longer listening. So if I were to say launch ISS fax, and then by the time I said, no, I'm good, and it says, okay, goodbye, at that point, it would have lost the email address or the address or whatever I provided to that user profile at that time. That's a great question. Let's see, pull up my questions page. Bear with me, everyone. I'm sorry. I'm just getting used to this GoToWebinar format here. So yeah, I had this problem too. Actually, I ran into it. I basically just spun up a new account to just kind of build us this ISS tracker bot. But yes, you need to have a paid account to basically build out that app service and host it. It will be free for the first 30 days, but I believe after that it does cost. You do have to have a production app service, which is I think $60 a month. So if you're using this in production in a call center, that kind of cost is negligible. But if you're using it on a personal site or something like that, it's a relatively high cost for just kind of hosting that bot there. And the Node framework, just a note on that, it's very good. It does not have all the integrations with community adapters that you might expect on the C#. I have been using the I use Node for the most part, but C# is just, it's much friendlier with this. There's just a lot more examples and a lot more documentation around the C# implementations. Okay, can you deploy a bot to SharePoint? I don't believe you can deploy a bot to SharePoint. That's not one of the channels that I saw, but I will check in on that after this call and see about that. That's interesting. And this does not integrate with Power BI. So this is going to be something that you would host on your website, or you would connect it to your Facebook or to your Alexa. It's so in that sense, you could put it on practically any website, but just yeah, Power BI and Power Apps and things like that might be harder to integrate it. So any documentation or tutorial suggestions? Yes, definitely. So my biggest suggestion for documentation and tutorials would be to literally dive into this bot builder sample page, take a bot and just pick it apart. It's going to be your best bet, just getting into it and figuring out what you can kind of break and where you can go wrong, and then just pulling it back down and starting from scratch again. That's a great way to get into it. They also have a bunch of samples online, but in general, this is kind of going to be your bot framework Bible, essentially. This is going to have all of the resources that you need to answer questions. All right. And I see a couple questions here about cards. I haven't used cards too much personally yet because I haven't had a need for them. Typically, when I want to kind of limit the user's responses, I am on and I just kind of give them a limited number of response options. Cards can be extremely useful and they can really kind of drive the conversation more accurately. I just haven't had too many needs for them personally at the moment. Cool, so let's continue. And another thing, you can actually integrate those cards with like the Google Assistant and all those other cool bot builder community APIs. They have extensions for those cards. So if we pull up the Google adapter here and scroll down to the bottom of the documentation on the Google adapter, you can actually see they can handle cards and all this good stuff across channels. When you do get into building for multiple channels, just know that it's good to kind of note what channel you're on within your bot and use that information to kind of more accurately get responses. You wouldn't want to necessarily give the same text response as you would for a voice response. You might want to kind of shorthand it a little bit or make it a little bit more conversational. And it would be difficult to introduce these kinds of cards in a speech. Cool. All right. Well, let's move on then. So once you have your bot builder, your bot ready to go and available, and it's on your app service, you are pretty much there. You can go into configuration here, and you can set up within your code kind of your app ID and app password so that it's available. But this is up to your discretion. You don't need to do this. You can also hard code these values. It's just a lot easier to put them into your configuration. And to do that, you would go into your capabilities.json, sorry, app settings.json. And here I don't have an app ID or app password set here, but you could add all the information that you would need for your bot here, and then you could basically gather the Luis ID and the Luis secret and make it easy to maintain so you don't need to update the code base every time. Okay, cool. And now that we are through all of that, let's move on to Google. So I was running into some issues getting my Google hooked up today, but let me just walk you through kind of this backend environment for setting up a Google Assistant bot. So we have our Google Actions console here. So this is all in your Google developer account. We have our ISS tracker chatbot. And within here, you would, oh, wrong account. I think half my problem today has just been being on too many accounts. But in here, you can set up your bot to have an invocation of something like ISS facts. And this is going to be the Google Assistant name. You can deploy your bot to different versions. So you can have an alpha release, a beta release, production release. And this is the same thing with Alexa. It's really nice to be able to put out an alpha, give it to a few test users, and then have those users be able to give you feedback before you go straight to production. And they also offer analytics. These are not extremely useful when you're implementing through the bot framework. They're more useful if you're using the intents that are built in. But I typically just ignored those and tended to use my bot framework analytics. All right. And you'll notice in here that there's sections for location targeting. One of the advantages of using these channels on different machines like Alexa and Google Assistant is that you can actually gather the location. And there's different ways to have users consent to that. You oftentimes, like with Google, you need to explicitly consent prior to requesting a user's email that they want to have their email accepted. So prior to asking for the person's email, you say, is it okay if I get your email? And then Google will force you to have the consent there, and then you can say, okay, what is your email? That's just kind of some of the small things to look out for when you're building these bots for multiple channels, and why it's good to know what channel you're talking across. And you can also limit location targeting and all that. We built a bot for a local county recently, and we limited it to the US because obviously we wouldn't want somebody from out of the country accessing it and getting invalid information. But that is pretty much everything that I can cover on the bot framework today. I wanted to check in. Do we have any more questions? Anything else that we can clear up before we close it out today?
No, it looks like you got everything covered here.
Awesome.
All right, everybody, I just want to thank you guys for attending this webinar. And Tom, thank you so much for hosting. We greatly appreciate it. As usual, you guys will receive a recording tomorrow, probably around noon Eastern Standard Time in your inbox. And also all of our recordings are on our YouTube channel under Pragmatic Works, under free training. If you guys have any questions before or after that, please feel free to reach out to Tom or myself. We're more than happy to help you guys out. Thank you guys so much for joining. Again, Tom, thank you so much for hosting, and I hope you guys all have a good rest, wonderful of your Tuesday. So have a good day and enjoy.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye.